Hi guys. Everybody hear me out there? Good morning. I have the dubious pleasure of speaking to you guys at 9 a.m. about a super captivating topic of web forms. So I'm going to do my best to keep it kind of fun and entertaining. And we'll see what we can do to make web forms not the dry topic you assume them to be. I've got a lot of things to cover in here, so I'm going to kind of jump in right away. But first I want to start out with a little bit of context so you know kind of my perspective on where I'm coming from when I talk about this topic. So I've spent a lot of time working on consumer web applications. Started out at NCSA back when Mosaic was kind of coming out, which is kind of the first widely distributed graphical web browser. I think that's the proper way to say it. Then I spent a lot of time at eBay and at Yahoo working on consumer apps. And recently, last year, a little less than a year ago, I authored a book called Web Form Design, published by Rosenfeld Media, which is actually over in that bookstore. But a lot of the comments and the best practices and the research and the data and all those sorts of things that I'm going to speaking to today are building on topics within this book. So hopefully that gives you a sense of where I'm coming from. And where I literally came from is the airport. Does this look like a familiar scene to anybody? So I fly every now and then, and a lot of times I have connecting flights. So when I'm on an airplane, I have my laptop out, I'm cranking through my emails, and it's literally one of the few chances I have to get my inbox somewhat close to zero. So I'll type up all these emails on the airplane, I get things going, I exit the plane, I'm trying to find my other gate to catch my next flight, and what I want to do is go online and send all these emails I've written, right? Doesn't sound too hard. Literally, I want to pay some internet service provider $10 or whatever for the right to jump online for a couple minutes. And I don't have much time to do it. So I swing open my laptop at the gate, and up pops what you'd expect, a web form. Right? So it doesn't seem too bad. For $6.95, just fill in this information, first name, last name, credit card. Then it starts to get a little strange, user account, password recovery code, I don't know what that is. But okay, I click it. What happened? Somewhere hidden on here is an error that says this username is already taken. I say hidden because it's the same color as everything else. It's sort of hidden down at the bottom. And for a little while, I'm wondering, did it take? What happened, right? Then I realized there's an error, and okay, well, this name I picked, I can't pick it. I don't know how I was supposed to know that, but I can't. So conveniently, it wiped out my credit card information, my password, my confirmed password, and password recovery code. So I enter all that back in again, and this time I say Luke W. I don't know, kind of shooting in the dark here, right? That username is already taken. So I go through this process about 5 times, just guessing, refilling in all these input fields, and before you know it, my flight's boarding, and I didn't send my emails. These guys didn't get my $7. And I use this as an example because things like this illustrate what we all know, which is that forms suck. I learned this lesson the hard way when I started working at eBay. eBay, the process of selling something you have in your garage or you bought earlier, you got as a gift and you don't want anymore, in order to list it online, you use an online form, right? So this is step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. That kind of sucks. But eBay is the 30th largest economy in the world, right? 700,000 people make their full-time living selling at home in the U.S. on eBay. So people are getting through this somehow. That doesn't necessarily mean it's a great experience. So the meta point here is, despite the awfulness of that eBay experience, all of you sort of cringed when you saw what you had to go through to list something for sale. Forms actually make a big impact. And I think forms are a very, very important part of the web in general, and I think they're very much a underutilized, not thought through, and not seen as very interesting. But they're really the linchpins that drive all the stuff that matters online. So things like commerce. If you want to buy something and somebody wants to sell you something, guess what? That's happening through a web form. If you want to contribute information or you want to do things like manage your bank account or do any kind of data manipulation entry, that's happening through a web form. If you want to participate in any kind of social site, whether you want to send some kind of comments, you want to talk to somebody, you want to create a profile, you want to network, whatever, all of that's happening through web forms. So web forms make money, they create community, they acquire information. They have a very, very big impact on everything that happens online. And small details and big details in how web forms get designed can have a really strong impact on how things work. If I still haven't convinced you that form design matters, consider a little site called YouTube, which has a form by which somebody uploads a video. This is what it used to look like about 2 years ago. Of course, they've redesigned it, they redesigned it, they redesigned it, they redesigned it. And I think the reason they care so much to redesign this thing is because this thing is so darn important, right? If you look at, in 2006, there were 65,000 videos per day coming through into YouTube. Now it's at 200, or in November of 2008, it was at 234,000. The latest data I've seen is that there's 1 billion video views a day happening on YouTube. And a huge amount of those videos actually came to YouTube through the form, right? There's all these API and different services and things like that, but an awful lot of activity, an awful lot of the value of when they sold this company to Google for 1.6 billion or whatever it was built off of web forms. So if we agree that web forms matter and they're a real important part of a lot of these different experiences, be they commerce, community, data manipulation, or what have you, then the next logical question becomes, well, how can we make forms good? Or how can we make forms better? And that's where the design of web forms really starts to matter. So I'm going to illustrate this by walking through my painful little experience at the airport and try and use that to illuminate some principles and some ideas around how to make web forms better. So the first thing that anybody does when they encounter a web form is, what the heck do I have to do here, right? I want what's on the other side. I want to get online. What do I have to do in order to get through that? And you kind of just quickly assess and get a gut check on what's going on. That's why one thing that matters an awful lot in web forms is path to completion. And path to completion in a short web form can mean one thing, in a longer web form can mean another thing. But let me give you an example in a simple form first. So this is about as simple as it can get. You're literally manipulating 2 radio buttons and a drop-down and then hitting a button. But you're about to send $37 to this person from this source with this email subject to this address, hit the button. Right? Compare that to, you're going to pay this person $37 from this source with this email subject, ship it to here, and there's a big honking yellow button at the bottom. There's a real clear flow of information from the first thing you have to consider down to the last thing you have to consider, and things aren't out of that flow, right? People want what's on the other side of the form, so we need to just really clearly put them inside of a system where they can get in and out quickly and easily. And we've done a lot of eye tracking and usability testing around this concept. This is a heat map. The darker the color, the more eye gaze and attention that area of the form gets. And you can see that there's this really, really strong axis where people kind of just go do. And when you watch people's gaze on web forms, the first thing they do is just sort of jump into an input field and start going. They don't read a lot of explanatory text. They don't parse everywhere. They really get in that funnel and keep going. So something like this might not be a great idea. This is a PayPal complete your payment form. And ignore the fact that it says your payment is already completed and then says click pay to confirm the details below. Because based on what I said, everybody's just going to ignore that. But anyway, let's say you're going to click pay to confirm this. So you're going to ship here that item, this quantity, that price, that total price with these notes to the seller, with this transfer from this redemption code over here to pay. Right? It's very scattered, and chances are you're going to miss some things, and chances are you're not going to really get that complete picture. There's not a very clear scan line. Here's an example. Over here, it literally looks like a bomb went off on the input fields, right? It just scattered them all over the place. And I guarantee, this button's over here, there's this thing here that says, please keep me informed of do. Right? 90% of people probably want to turn that off, but they're not going to see it because they're kind of manipulating these input fields, and they hit the button, and they've signed up for some spammy mailing list that they didn't want. And all of a sudden, your inbox is filled with gunk. So I've been using kind of simple forms to illuminate, explain this clear path to completion concept, but they apply to complex things too, right? Here's me developing an IP address to scan. I get a lot of comments from people that say, oh, I work on complex forms, right? All these things of simple forms like e-commerce and registration, that stuff doesn't apply to what I do. And my first comment is, well, if you inherently think what you're doing is complex, then, you know, Lord have mercy on your poor users. But my second comment is, well, all we're doing is looking at these principles in isolation, and they apply in broader situations as well, right? So this is creating an IP scan, and there's probably a lot of things you have to consider to create an IP scan, and you can kind of move through. You're picking a number of IP addresses to scan, sorry. Again, you can utilize this principle, clear action on the bottom, clear flow through. Anybody try to buy a house online? I did. But again, even when you're buying a house online, which is an inherently complex process because of lawyers, realtors, you name it. One thing worth pointing out is when you do get into a situation where the kinds of questions or the amount of information you need to get from people doesn't really fit into a single web page, there are situations where you want to at least give people a sense of where they are and where they're going. So I like to talk about scope, in this case showing you that, hey, there's kind of these general sections, position, where you are in relation to that scope, and status. So here you can see last time you went through this, it was saved on this and this date, and we're keeping all your information for you. Now this site, Redfin, actually went through and redesigned, and they came up with what is a simpler progress indicator, right? It's just 1, 2, 3, 1, introduction, 2, offer information, 3, fine-tune your offer. Liars. Why do I say liars? Because while well-intentioned, a lot of times these progress indicators that promise you a number of steps are actually not telling the truth. So here's a great example, right? Fidelity.com, they have this great start page, tells you what you're going to need, takes you 10 to 15 minutes, and you know, you're on account type. Looks like the first step is going to be personal information, right? Oops, right, wrong. Some step that's not even in that flow is the first thing. It's, are you new to Fidelity or are you an already existing customer? If you're new to Fidelity, then you have to fill in 3 other pages. So that beautiful progress meter that laid all these things out for you flat out lied, right? A better case is using something more general like Amazon. So Amazon doesn't promise any 1, 2, 3 or anything like that. They basically say, hey, you're going to do some shipping and payment stuff. Maybe we'll talk about gift wrapping and we'll place your order. But shipping and payment could be a one-step process if you've already got a shipping address and you've already got a credit card on file, right? It could be a 5-step process if you're going to go choose to pay by PayPal. Then you have to go and log into PayPal. Then you have to pick a funding source. Then you have to come back and distribute that funding source. So if you have to add a new address or go to your address book, pick a different address, so on and so forth. So something like this, where they're promising you a 1, 2, 3, is probably not actually accurate given the different branches that these things can take. So at a high level, in terms of best practices for paths to completion, number 1 is make sure there is a clear path to completion, a place to start and a place to end when you're going through the form, and that things aren't scattered all over the place and being potentially missed. If you're dealing with longer things, scope, status, position helps. Start pages can help set people up when they need to go look things up. And things that are a bit more general when there's variability tend to work better. So that's one thing I would do to our little web form from the airport. I would probably drop the multiple column layout and opt for something a little bit simpler. So what else is going on? I mentioned before that people go straight to the first input field and they start answering a question. So their immediate focus is on the field and not necessarily down below it. So here we have these little light gray labels underneath the input fields. And you know, they're not much of an issue here, but if you have not the greatest vision, little light gray text underneath the label is not necessarily fantastic. And then it also varies where the label shows up and how. So people ask, you know, well, should I top, right, left align my labels on web forms, so on and so forth. 2 years ago, Matteo Penzo did some eye tracking studies, and when I was at eBay, we actually ran some multi-geographical analytic tests on different web form labels. And we collected some data, that indicates some pretty interesting decision points by which you decide which one of these layouts to go with. So if the data you're collecting is familiar, aka it's something people are likely to have an answer to, like name, address, phone number, credit card, you name it, and your primary goal is to minimize the time it takes to complete a form, top-of-line labels work really great. They're also really great because if you localize things, so you move something from English to French, it's going to get 200% longer, or Dutch, it's going to get a lot longer. That label can flex pretty clearly without breaking up your layout. If you are dealing with complex inputs, like maybe multiple checkboxes or radio buttons or what have you, a vertically aligned label can bound those elements pretty nicely. From an accessibility perspective, no matter what kind of device somebody comes to a form with, if it's just structured in the HTML as label, input, label, input, label, input, the way you'd lay out a top-of-line form, that's going to be the most accessible. Everything else, you're going to have to play around with the code a bit because you're manipulating things with CSS or positioning or floating or what have you. And it's also probably the easiest to develop because it's just, there's no floating around or layering in weird tables or ways like this. So you can see here in this diagram, right, the label and the input field are right next to each other. When I'll show eye tracking data later, that means people can generally parse those in a single eye glance versus 3 or 4 in other layouts. And then you can just really quickly process this thing through. Disadvantage is you do need some more vertical space for these layouts, and sometimes people feel that's kind of a constraint. So this is an example of a top-of-line label. Right-align labels also maintain a pretty clear association between the input field and the label. They require less vertical space than top-of-line labels, but they do have this rag over here that reduces readability of the things that somebody's actually asking you to complete. So if you're dealing with a form where somebody needs to scan it, find out 1 or 2 things that they need to fill in versus blasting through it, this might not be a great option. And here's sort of the right-aligned label form. Left-aligned labels, I think, work well when one of your primary use cases is scanning that list of labels to find the 1 or 2 things you need to enter. So like settings dialogues, preferences panels, forms that are dealing with a lot of unfamiliar information or only need to get changed once or twice. You have this disadvantage of this is a little further away from here, but it is really easy to scan the lines. And both with left and right aligned labels, I guess I should mention, if this text starts being localized or if it runs long or these inputs are complex, the association of here and here can start to break and your layout begins to get munged. So here's an example of a settings dialog with left aligned labels. I alluded to some of this eye tracking data that illustrates some of the pros and cons of these top left and right aligned labels. And in this study by Matteo, the right aligned labels as compared to left aligned labels of a simple form reduced completion times by nearly half. Which when you're dealing with a situation where you want somebody to buy something or you want somebody to register for something or you want somebody to move through any kind of form quickly and easily, which, trust me, everybody wants to do. Nobody likes filling in web forms. So when you get that web form from, if you can get somebody through something half as fast, sounds pretty good, right? Top-align labels were even faster than that. They were about 10 to 15% faster than the right-align labels. So that's a pretty substantial amount of savings across a full form or across multiple forms or so on and so forth. Now, the hypothesis around why this works, I think, is because you can see here, you can take in the label in the input field with a single eye saccade instead of jumping back and forth once or twice. And people have this fear that people can't associate this with this, so they put like background colors around it or something like that. People can make that association fine. It just takes them a little bit longer to do so. So when I kind of say this and lay out these different options, people say, well, so and what I say is, left-align labels slow people down. That's why they're good for unfamiliar data or stuff you want people to consider a bit more or locate. Right-align labels and top-align labels let people go quicker. So some people say, whoa, what if I'm in one form and I want to slow people down a little bit and then I want to speed them up? Can I mix these things around, right? Can I go top-align and left-align and right-align? Well, I think no, because that breaks this clear path to completion principle, right? So I wouldn't really alternate it within a form. at a high level, in terms of the best practice here, if you're dealing with top-aligned, or if you're dealing with familiar data and you really want to reduce completion times, which is a huge, huge amount of web forms, then just use top-aligned. It's going to be clean and easy. If you really feel vertical space is an issue for you, then you could consider right-align. And if you're dealing with this advanced data entry, or you want people to parse that list, or only deal with one or two things, left-align works well. So the other question I get, and I'm trying to read your minds of questions you have, well, what about labels inside of input fields? That makes it even shorter, right? Well, I think that's all well and good, but this is a input field on LinkedIn where it says, send a personal note to all the recipients you've selected. And I get an invitation that says, write a personal note to all the recipients you have selected. So this is not, Joe Schmo web company. This is a pretty serious web company. And the challenge is this stuff isn't perfect. Errors come up. And so when people talk about labels within input fields, the first thing I say is make sure the label or the help text doesn't become part of people's answers, right? That's kind of the first thing you have to get done. The second thing is this label is gone as soon as somebody enters an input field. So if you use this methodology for a whole form, you're going to have a whole form with answers and no questions. Makes it kind of hard to check your answers, right? Also, any assistance that these things are providing while somebody's entering a value is gone as soon as they start typing in here. And another thing to note that if you're using labels or help text within input fields, it's really important to make sure it doesn't look like data. This is why people put dashes around the select in a drop-down, because it doesn't look like an answer. So in the LinkedIn example, it's like gray text, so on and so forth. So the next best practice I'm going to advocate for our little airport form is label alignment. Because we're dealing with a situation where we want to get people through that form quickly and we want to optimize success rates, and we're asking for familiar data, top-aligned should probably help a lot. But that's not all. That's wrong. Here's a good one. Why are you asking me for my email? If you're going to send me a receipt that I bought this service, then hey, that's great. I'm all for it. If you're going to spam me with marketing email, then hell no, I'm not giving you my email address. But they don't say. Why do I have to create a username? I don't need, I just want to give you my credit card and get online. I don't want to become a, we're not going to start dating here. So when and how we're in these sorts of situations, help and tips can actually get people information to address questions like, I'm being asked for unfamiliar data. What is this? People might question why data is being requested. Why are you asking me for this? There's some recommended ways of providing that data, or things are optional. If you use too much help and tips, though, things can get out of hand. And I'll show some dynamic solutions, some inline and inline exposure solutions that can help address this. Generally, the best way to provide people with help is visible and adjacent to the question you're asking them. So right here, pick a password, 4 or more characters. Email, we don't spam, period. Okay. This is a quiz. How many different ways of getting help are there on this form? When you have a number, just shout it out. Any numbers? 10? Anybody going higher than 10? No one going higher than 10? 11? Anybody go higher than 11? 12. Anybody higher than 12? 13. I heard 20. Okay, I don't know if we're going to get to 20, but let's take a look. So, help, right? Live help, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm going to count this line of text as help. So that's 7. Link 8, 9. Line of text 10, link 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. And if you can't figure it out, somebody will do it for you. 18 different ways of getting help to pick between one of 3 radio buttons where there already is a default choice. This is something where you're picking one of 3 options and an answer is already given to you. So me, Mr. User Interface Design Guy, where I see any kind of user interface smothered in help text, my first flag is there's some bigger issue going on here, right? And the bigger issue here is people don't know how to pick between these things, right? It's a choice that the system is structured in this way that there's these different formats for how to sell your stuff, and people are just, I don't want to sell my stuff. I don't know any of these formats. So that said, sometimes there are situations where you do have multiple meaningful ways to give people help. And in those situations, we can turn to automatic systems. So this one's just inline exposure. As you move between input fields, it gives you a little snippet of help text if and how you need it. So when I'm on email address, you must supply a valid email address. This is Snap Tax from Intuit, where you're filling in your taxes online. And instead of doing input field by input field help, they do kind of section level by section level help. The disadvantage of automatic inline exposure is when you first come to this form, there's nothing visible that says it's going to help you, right? It's not until you start engaging with either one of these that you get a sense that there's actually assistance provided. But the good thing about this is if it's your first time through, we can kind of assist you as you go. Another format is user-activated inline exposure. So here you actually have to take some kind of action, click on a link or whatever to understand what an IMEI code is. So I click on IMEI. It turns out it's the International Mobile Equipment Identity Number. Anybody knew that? No? Good. That's why there's help there. Another form of user-activated inline exposure is kind of this on-hover state. So here you can hold your cursor. It'll show you a little bit of a tip. The previous thing had an issue of jumping the form around a lot. If you click on it, it's scooting the fields up and down. Here, the challenge is you have to keep your mouse cursor over a small area, and then it's not visible once you move it and you actually start entering things, so that's not great. But it is more lightweight in that you don't actually have to click. User-activated dialogue. If you're dealing with a lot of information like charts or tables or graphs or whatever, maybe you can turn those things into little windows, whether inline windows or dialogue windows. In this case, how much money should I put in here in terms of savings? That's not something you can answer with a single line of text. Another method is this user-activated section exposure. So I showed you before the process of selling on eBay, which was really, really painful. In this redesign, what happens is there's essentially a fixed area where help text lives. So you can turn this help frame on and off by using this global toggle. You just turn it on, off, or you can close it over here. If you're a new user, it's open by default and visible to you there. If you're an advanced user, you can choose to close it and it'll stay closed. As you move between the input fields, this updates with information relevant to the field you're in. So when you're on title, it'll have information about title. When you're on subtitle, it'll have information about subtitle. And you can turn it off, on and off, anywhere using this little question mark. So if you're in subtitle, you don't understand that, you can turn it off, you'll get this, or turn it on, you'll get the subtitle information right there. So it's a consistent place for help text, so it's not flying around over there, and it's contextually relevant and accessible. And I think it makes sense in certain situations, but perhaps in a simple registration form like here, it may be a little excessive to give you, a treatise on what we're going to do with your email address, as you can see here. Username. So in a simple form that you're filling in once, this might not be the best case. In general, to wrap all this help and tip stuff into best practice, you want to minimize the amount of help and tips required to fill out a form. If you need it a little bit, stick it visible and adjacent to the questions you're asking. That tends to work best. If you have a decent amount of stuff and you need to consider an automatic system, inline exposure may work best for something where people may be unsure about why or how to answer a form. If you're using forms that are reused frequently and deal with questions that people might not have immediate answers to, like unfamiliar data, then user-activated lets them say, oh, what's an IMEI code again? Oh, okay, I get it. Inline help probably works best unless you have a lot of help content, like text, graphics, charts, and in which case maybe this consistent help section might be a good thing to go with. So the third thing I want to do for our little airport form is insert some help and tips that answer this question. What are you going to do with my email address and why? Just a few simple assurances. So here's another fun one. Back to our web or airport form, right? I'm filling this in. It's asking me for my user account. No, you can't use that username. How can I possibly know what usernames are available, right? Why do you, evil form, keep me guessing and keep wiping out my data? Do you really not want my money that bad? So to address this issue, we can turn to inline validation. And inline validation is essentially while somebody's answering a question, we can give them direct feedback that gives them valid answers, that suggests things that could be valid, or that validates their answers, suggests things that could be valid, or helps them stay within valid limits. So let's look at our little username thing before, right? So here I'm typing Jim. It tells me, hey, Jim's not available. Then I try Jimbo. Can't get Jimbo. Go to Jim Bones, and it turns out I can actually use Jim Bones. All right, so right there, by using this inline validation methodology, I don't have to go bouncing back and forth and pogo sticking and guessing what's inside of their record set of usernames. I get immediate confirmation about what's available and what's not. Here's another example of using inline validation. In this case, guiding people towards more correct answers. So you guys have probably seen this a lot, but you're typing in a password which has to contain 6 characters and be case sensitive. Oh, that's weak, that's medium, and if I add a few more things, maybe I can actually get to strong. Woohoo! Now, I think this actually could be more harmful than good, because now all of a sudden I have a password that I can't possibly remember. But I'm so obsessively motivated to move that thing all the way to the end that I'm going to keep adding characters and spaces and dashes and stuff until I get it all the way to strong. These sorts of completion bars, it's actually really interesting to watch people complete these because they have an inkling that they need to get it to the end, right? And in this case, I think you actually could end up with a password that you can't possibly ever remember, much less type. So that might be a bad thing. But the general idea is you can utilize inline validation to get people to more correct answers. So here's our password validation thing again. How secure is it? Now, if we look at the full form, right? So this is create your password. We just did that part. Now it's asking me for my secret password, Edna, my favorite teacher, user account name, birth date. I'm going to put in May 24th, 2020. Select state, zip code. I don't want to give people my real birth date, right? So I click them through here. I go in and fill in all their crazy stuff, do the terms of service, accept the online privacy policy, and I end up back on the same form with a bunch of errors. In this case, this password didn't match this. How could it? I threw in like 50 random characters to get it to strong. Favorite teacher, I didn't read this text. It says 5-character minimum. My favorite teacher's name is actually Edna. So what am I going to do? Change her name? And then over here, birth date. Your birth date is not valid. Please verify that you have entered the correct date, 2020. So a lot of things that as I was just blazing through this form, I didn't catch, and now I have to go back and kind of address this, and I'm kind of thrown into a loop. I want to contrast this with the registration process on Yahoo that we worked on about a year and a half or 2 years ago. So here, as I type in my name and then I type in my last name, you get a little thing on the left there that just sort of validates and then fades away and lets you know, hey, that was okay, right? That's a valid input. So I click mail, it goes, zoosh, okay, it says great, and it tells me now why it's asking for my birthday. So that gives me that help text. I type in May 24th, and then I, again, type 2020, tab out to go there, and it says, hey, are you really from the future? I said, no, I'm not really from the future. So then I go in and put in, an accurate birth date, which it validates, put in a postal code, type that in. And this is something very interesting that happened, was it auto-generated actual IDs for me based on my first name, last name. Right? Again, as I move through password, it tells me right there I have an error. I want you to pay attention to one thing. So once I go into here and change that password, the retype password blanked out. And I'll talk about that in a second because there's some complications to inline validation. So what did we see here? We saw, one, as I'm filling in information, it's just kind of confirming for me that it's okay, right? I'm getting this little green check mark, it's fading away, and it's just letting me know I've provided a valid input as I move through here. When I hit something that I might have questions about, it tells me why it's asking me that. Then inline, in terms of the errors, remember on the last form, it told me, hey, this birth date is invalid, ... fill it back in. Here, just right in line, we say, hey, are you really from the future? Fix that, please. The other thing it does is it eliminates this whole notion of having to pick a username and guess what could be in there. I don't even have to guess. It just tells me, hey, here's some great suggestions for you. I just click on it and I'm done, right? That eliminates that whole burden. Then with the password validation, I'm going to show an example in a second of how this is actually important. So just keep in mind that when I came back to change my password, it blinked out where I had to retype things. This is an example of that input validation where we're just kind of do a quick little spinner, show you the fade, so on and so forth. Now, when I talk about inline validation, everybody gets all eager and jumps into the JavaScript and starts adding this stuff. And I have to caution you guys that there's actually a lot of nuance and detail to getting this correct. This is a sign-up form on a site called Mint. And again, simple sign-up form, right? And so first thing it asks me is for my email. So I type the letter L and it says, this is not a valid email. Yeah, I know. Give me a chance here, people, right? I haven't even gotten past the first character. And this continues throughout the rest of the form. As soon as you type something, it slaps you on the wrist. Not a very good experience. To their credit, Mint has redesigned this form, and I want to illustrate this example because I think it points out some of the challenges again. So this time I'm going to go with Brian, and it says, hey, that's not valid. But when I go to confirm, it says, okay. Well, that's a little weird, right? So here under zip code, I say 54423. It says, okay. It tells me where that's at. Then I go in to type a password, right? It says that password must be 5 characters or less. So I go in and try and change it. The one below says it's okay. And now I'm actually in an error state because it says you have an okay password, but the password below was not confirmed, right? Let me show you guys that again because I went through it a bit quick. So what happened was it's the same problem that they have on top. All it's doing in the confirmation space is checking to see if it matches what's above, right? Which doesn't necessarily mean it's a valid input. Brian is not a valid email address even though it matches Brian above it. Now here with the password, right, I type in a password which is not correct. I mirror that same password below, and it says okay. Then I go to change that password. Now that's an active password, but it doesn't match the one below, even though it still says okay. Now I go in and change this to brian@yahoo.com, and all of a sudden it realizes that that does not match. I know that's a little, lots of things going on at the same time, but the meta point is there's all these nuances and details in how you validate and when you validate that really need to be thought through when you do this sort of stuff. The use case around password, which I'll show you here is, in the Yahoo form, if you type in a password, type it in here. As soon as you go in and change this one, the thing that retypes it, we blank it out. Because it can't possibly match anymore, right? So we just remove the potential for you to have an error because as soon as you change the one thing that needs to match the other thing, they don't match anymore. Otherwise, you're deliberately putting somebody into an error state. Other examples of inline validation. This is an inline valid input suggestion. So what's the airport code for Chicago? ORD, okay, like 1 or 2 people know it. Most of us don't. You start typing CHI, it pops down, you click ORD, it fills it in, and by the way, it eliminated the need for you to actually fill in the rest of the form. Because right on the right, it shows you, okay, hey, if you're going from SFO to ORD, here's the dates, here's how much it costs. So, wow, think about that. We use inline validation not only to get you a valid suggestion to fill in the input field, we use it to prevent you from even having to fill in the form. That's kind of exciting. Another example of inline validation comes to us from Yahoo Answers. Yahoo Answers is a site where real-life human beings ask questions and real human beings answer questions. In Taiwan, the average time to answer questions is about 45 seconds. In the US, it's about 5 minutes. There's over 1 billion resolved question and answer pairs in the system. So in order to keep that volume up and in order to route questions to people who can answer them well, we have to make sure we have good questions, right? So there's a lot of inline validation that happens on this simple form of what's your question. So I start typing growing carrots, And it says, hey, that's a little short. Maybe you want to, ask a who, what, when, where, why question. And believe it or not, there are a lot of people that type this sort of thing, like baseball good, question mark? So then I revise it, and I say, oh, and then if I continue, I can actually turn this into an error state, right? I can say, no, you got to have it more than 20 characters, because otherwise it's not a valid question. If I type in growing carrots, whoa, slow down there on the exclamation, right? People aren't going to necessarily want to deal with this. How do I grow carrots? Did you leave the caps lock key on? Right? Maybe people are going to perceive this as shouting. You might not want to cap lock everything. And then, best of all, how do I grow carrots? Wait, we actually probably have an answer to this. So, voila, here's answers to how do I grow carrots. You don't even have to ask your question. Again, just getting rid of the whole need for you to fill in a form at that point. You can click through here. And this system actually has a lot of complex states, right? So there's error states, there's misspelling states, there's tip states, there's suggestion states, so on and so forth. And as you go through and actually interact with this, it'll help guide you towards creating a better question. We found this to be pretty darn successful in raising the quality bar of the inputs we get through web forms. Another thing you can use inline validation for is, keeping people within limits. This is the super basic example. How many characters do you have left within a field? And people always say, hey, Luke, you're talking about simple examples. How can I use these principles in, my more complex world of web forms? Here's an approval routing data form. You can auto-populate who the approving officer is, because chances are you probably don't know how to spell their name. So inline validation could help a lot. Negotiating banks, reference numbers, all these sorts of things probably pull from a set of potential options. And if you enable those inline through inline validation, it could aid people filling in these forms a lot. So this best practice is really inline validation is great for inputs that have potentially high error rates, and you can use it to disambiguate inputs, and you can also use it to communicate limits. So in my airport little form, I'm going to try using inline validation to get rid of some of the challenges we saw earlier. What else is wrong with this trying to get online form at the airport? Well, if I look down at the things that allow me to complete the form, I see two buttons. One button says submit, and it gets me online. The other button says reset, and it clears out everything I did. They both look exactly the same, and they're positioned exactly in the same place. So for quite a while, I've been saying not all buttons or actions on a web form are equal, right? There's a primary action that is finish the darn thing, get it out of my face, get me what I want. And then there's the button that says, reset, cancel, go back. That button is very rarely used. And if it's ever used, it's probably used by mistake. So I've been advocating differentiate them, right? If something's primary and something's secondary, make the primary thing big and bold, or make the secondary thing a link, or separate them visually, or if you're just using text links, make one bolder, or change it up. In any case, try to avoid this. Anybody see a problem with this form? How many people fail to complete a single input form? This is asking you one question. Lots and lots of people get this wrong. Because it's like, oh, crap. I was flying to London not too long ago, and I was trying to find this flight that would work with my itinerary and everything. So I'm on the British Airways site. I'm looking for flights. Finally, I find the perfect flight after about 30 minutes. Costs around $4,000. I'm ready to hit the button, and I'm on this form. Does anybody see a way I can actually pay for this ticket? So I'm scanning around here. I'm like, okay, this thing right here maybe looks like it. Empty shopping basket and start again. Okay, and I'm scanning around. This looks like an ad. This looks like an ad. Looks like there's some text here. Empty shopping basket and start again. Continue to payment page. This thing has a red arrow even. Right? So at this point in time, this little action, continue to payment page, is probably the most important thing on this page. It's the thing that gets British Airways $4,000 of my money, and it's the thing that gets me to London after 3 minutes of trying to find the perfect flight. Why is it this teensy-weensy little text link on the bottom of the form? Again, it doesn't even get the red arrow. Empty shopping basket and try again gets a red arrow. Here's another great example, right? Big green. Oh, by the way, what does the asterisk mean on a form? No, actually here it says optional. Does anybody see a way I can complete this form? Tell me when you find the actual button over here. Smushed up against the ad, right? Did anybody not see that? It took me a while to see that. Here's a great one. Anybody see a problem here? No? This is fine? Ship it? Let's ship it. Cancel. So anyway, I've been preaching about this primary, secondary button thing. And so people have been asking, well, how should we do it? Should we do a button and a link, 2 buttons, a button in a gray box, put them to the right, put them to the left, put them in the middle, whatever. So we ran some eye tracking and usability metrics on this. We put 23 people through these 6 options, and we came back with some interesting data. The fastest performing least number of fixations option was actually this one, with the 2 buttons being equal. So people kind of shot down this thing, hit the button, so on and so forth. A teeny bit slower, literally in the 0.2 to 0.8 second range, was the options C and A, which is where they're a button and a link or a button and a gray bar. Looking strictly at performance data, this thing performs well, the best actually. These perform a little bit worse, but we had a lot of qualitative feedback where people said, hey, I really appreciated how this slowed me down and made me consider the difference between the 2 options. Really made me think like the forum was trying to watch out for me, so on and so forth. And what you see here is people didn't even glance at this thing, right? They just kind of go, wherever they get dropped off, they assume that's the action, and they hit the button and they run. So even though this is a little bit faster, I still advocate a differentiation, especially when you run into the fact that layouts differ. So the thing that performed the worst was option E. Now, option E was where continue or go forward is to the right and go back or cancel is to the left. You guys have probably seen this layout a bunch of times, right? It's a pretty common one on the web. So here, 6 out of 23 people failed to complete this form. And again, it's because the expectation, they kind of get dropped off here and they just hit the thing without even looking or thinking. And that button was cancel. So that wasn't very good. F, which has the 2 buttons in the middle, actually required the most fixations and the longest fixations. So even though people successfully completed this, they were a lot more efficient with some of the other layouts that we tried. And so what this points to me yet again is if you look at the 3 best performing options, A, B, C, all of them have one thing in common, which is the primary action to move you forward is aligned directly with the bottom of the input field. So as soon as you come down, there's the button, here's your scan line, and you're off to the races. And again, you can apply this to forms that are not easy e-commerce situations as well. So best practice in terms of primary and secondary actions, try to avoid secondary actions, reset, cancel, go back. Most cases don't need it. Otherwise, make it clear which one does the good thing, which one does the bad thing. And that clear path to completion thing is pretty darn important. So for our little web input form, or our web airport form, I'm going to distinguish between what's primary and what's secondary. Okay, what else is wrong here? Sometimes things take a while, like credit card authorization. And so in that case, we might want to deal with actions in progress. And in particular, what we want to do is just give people feedback about what's going on. What we don't want to do is this. Anybody see this out there? How about this one? If you click the submit button twice, you run the risk of having your credit card charged twice. Right, we can't figure out our system, so we're going to put the burden on you. If it's really that bad, why not, when they click post, disable the submit button? Don't let them make a mistake, right? Show them that there's something in progress. In this case, we're attaching a file, and blank out the submit button. And And here it shows you that that file is being attached. How do I complete this form? Turns out I have to click this single checkbox, or single radio button, which from all like interaction design principles is a fallacy in of itself. It's a mutually exclusive choice of itself. So you click on that and voila, up pops a mystery button. And then you can actually click that mystery button and go. So when I say disable the submit button, I don't mean hide it until somebody figures out some kind of puzzle, right? It's not a kid's game. Other thing that happens, anybody, you ever see this? I accept and agree to your terms and conditions. Usually this is unchecked and it's right next to another checkbox that says, I want to get your spam, and that one's checked. And so you want to check this one, uncheck that one, and then click go. It's actually very, very surprising how many errors occur as a result of this I agree and accept thing on a typical web form. Generally, anytime there's an unchecked version of this, there's a high number of errors. So instead, what you can do is, hey, by clicking on the button below, I agree with the terms of service. Or better yet, by clicking register, you agree to the terms of service. This is great. I just have to show this. So you've successfully created your account. Subscribe to all this. Now, if you're an interaction design person such as I am, if I click subscribe but I don't check anything, am I subscribed to everything? If I click two things and I click do not subscribe, does that mean that those are the only two things I haven't subscribed to? You start to see the fallacy of this? Now the best thing is, this is where they get you on the next screen. They switch the actions on you. Right? So here, it's like you want to hit this one. Here, if you hit, you want to hit this one. So, I'm sorry, this one comes first, and they swap it on you. Anyhow, you want to provide indications of tasks in progress. You want to avoid duplicate submissions. You can try disabling submit by that. And you want to consider some ways to streamline stuff. So I'm going to do that on our little web form as well. Now, the thing that got me first was I had no idea why I couldn't move forward, right? This little red text buried beneath here and in between the last input field and the button looks like the title, looks like the rest of the stuff. It's very unclear to me that there's an error. When there's an error on a web form, it's the most important thing on the page because it's preventing you from moving forward, right? You want to complete the web form. You want to get through and get to the other side, and the people with the form obviously want you to do the same, but if you don't know that there's something blocking you, how can you do that? So this is the Fairmont Hotel President's Club form. I fill this whole thing in, and I get this. What happened? Anybody have a clue? Oh, okay, so beneath these 3 blocks of paragraphs, it says, we are sorry, you cannot find this number. Please verify the number and try again. How? Right? Instead, what if they had done something like this? Make it really clear there's an error. Right? Like I said, when there's an error on the form, it's the most important thing. It's blocking you from moving forward. So sorry, we can't find that number. Try again. There's a visual association between the error and this top-level message, and there's a link that says contact us if you can't get there. So what we've done is strong visual placement up top, association with the error and the actual thing causing the error, and then ways to remedy it at the point of the error. One of the things I want to emphasize is you'll note that if you compare what I did here to what I did here, not only did I make this text red, but I actually inserted some text. And there's a real deliberate reason for that, which is you want to have a doubling of visual language at the point of errors. So people that are colorblind can't catch just a change in color. Instead, what you'll do is insert an icon and a color change, or a background and a color change, or a color change and a line of text on how to remedy it. That helps make a clear association of where the error actually is. Now, anybody notice something different about this form? I bet you we fixed completion rates by like 50% with this change. Right? So, but let's say somebody doesn't fill this in and hits cancel. What do we do? Well, it's that same formula I showed you before. Prominent message, with a visual symbol that says there's an error, real clear remedy of how to fix that error, an association of the place with the error, and the top level message, and then a way to go in and fix it. Now sometimes people say, hey, that's too much stuff on such a simple form, but when you get to a longer form, this association with what's causing the error actually makes a big difference. And especially when you get to the stage where there's multiple errors on the form, you can let people grok and see where they need to go. So in terms of best practices on the error side, communicate when errors happen, provide ways to fix it, make sure you're showing people what's causing the error, and this doubling of visual language is something that I keep emphasizing because it does help bring the appropriate amount of attention to the problems. So the seventh thing I'm going to fix on our little airport form is fix that darn error message. What else we got here? Why do I have to create a username? Right? I just want to get online. What's the purpose of asking me for that? Which leads us to this topic of unnecessary inputs. And unnecessary inputs is the general notion that any question you ask people, they have to read that question, think about how they're going to answer it, put their answer into whatever kind of affordance you've put there, so on and so forth. So every single thing you ask them requires a certain amount of mental, cognitive load, effort, time, so on and so forth. As a result, if you can be vigilant about every question you ask people, can I get rid of it? Can I ask it later? Can we infer the answer? You can cut down a lot on the time and effort that people need to parse all the questions that they might not actually have to answer. This was the eBay registration form back in 2003, and there was a number of input fields in here that were a little jarring, like annual household income, gender, right? When this thing got redesigned and these questions, a lot of questions got taken out and postponed and put after the registration form, completion rates shot through the roof. It was a huge financial impact to eBay because they got a ton of new members in. But also the completion rates of this optional information actually shot up a substantial amount too because people didn't feel like they had to fill it in as part of registration. It's presented to them as optional stuff you can tell us about later if you feel like it or not. So they still got answers, more answers actually, and they didn't impact their primary metric of getting new people onto the site. So removing things can have a huge impact, right? Just the sheer fact of getting rid of questions. And I get asked a lot of times by people with forms to help redesign their forms, and the first question I ask is, well, what are you doing with this answer? What are you doing with this answer? It turns out, in many, many cases, 30% or so, or 40% of the questions people are getting asked in web forms, the companies don't use in any way, shape, or form. They, we have to ask that. That's the way we used to do it. Or, what usually happens is a developer or designer gets handed a list of questions, and they don't ask what should be included in here. Instead, they just say, okay, how am I going to lay these out? What colors am I going to use to arrange this form? And the developer says, okay, what name value pairs do I have to assert in my database? And nobody asks the question, why are we asking people this, right? But from a usability and from a performance standpoint of getting things done and getting people in here, how many questions and what kind of questions you ask people actually has a huge, huge impact on completion rates. So does anybody see an unnecessary input here? Heard card type? Yeah, you actually don't need to ask somebody their card type, at least in the US. There's a set of number systems, so if something starts with a 5, we know it's a MasterCard, right? So here we can get rid of a question from this PayPal form to this one where you start typing 5, we just, again, inline highlight the card you're using, and you're off running. Here's an example of it not necessarily working out. I mentioned earlier that anytime I see a ton of help text on a form, I know there's an issue. So here, not only is there a paragraph of help text inserted, but it's been made red, so it's a bigger issue. If it was made bold and red, then I would know that there's a real big issue. But so anyway, what these guys, Weber, thought would be great is, hey, we can use your zip code to get your address. And voila, we'll save people having to type in their city and state because we can just use their zip code. So you type in your zip code, you pick your city and state, and it gets filled in, and there you go. But the reason I think it's not working in this case, whereas it could work in the credit card case, is the address block is such a familiar set of input fields that everybody can really parse it and figure it out really quickly. It doesn't take you much time to type in a 2-letter abbreviation for a state and your actual city name, right? So people just go in and they parse it as a unit, as an address block unit. And here we've broken that flow. We've broken that familiarity of that structure. And as a result, people start to get confused. They ask questions. They don't understand what's going on. Where do I enter my city and state? Because in here I see it blank, right? I want to enter it. I usually enter that before I enter the zip code, so on and so forth. So in that case, it might be a bad idea to remove those inputs. And hence I say look for opportunities to remove stuff, but don't complicate things for the sake of removing things. So that's number 8, unnecessary inputs. Now, Boingo, who is the provider of that form that I encountered at the airport, actually went through and redesigned their form a little bit. And so you can see here they created like a 3-step process now. It's select your plan, set up your account, confirm and download. I don't know why. But they actually created some more clear structure to the form, at least to this part of it. Your information, so about you, billing name and address, and then here's your credit card information. Those are more meaningful groupings than required information, credit card information, user account information, terms and agreements. If this is required information, does that mean I don't need to fill in the rest of this? That's pretty good, right? So they at least created some more meaningful structures. And this brings me to the point of form organization. I get asked a lot, how long should my form be? Should it be 1 page, 3 pages, or 5 pages? And I always say, 2.8. But the real answer is it depends. And what it depends on is, what you're trying to ask people, who you're talking to, and how you're talking to them. The one thing I want to really stress, and I'll talk a little bit about this, keep, cut, postpone. But first I want to talk a little bit about speaking with one voice, because it's really easy for forms to blow up. And I'll explain why. So let's say we have a requirement coming from an organization that says we need a way for people to contact us. Right? Pretty simple. So you hand that off to some user interface designer. He says, okay, I understand those requirements. In order for somebody to contact us, I have to know who's contacting us. I have to have some way of getting back in touch with them, be it either email, phone, fax, whatever. And I need to have a way for them to give us what they want to say and a way to submit that thing so we can get it. So this is the form that comes out from that process. Sales team finds out we're going to hear from customers, and they say, oh, we need full contact information, phone number, address, city, so we can follow up on these leads, and we need to know why they're contacting us. Okay? Engineering team finds out about this and says, hold on, in order to create a unique record of somebody in our data structure, we have to have first name, last name, and we need an email address because otherwise we can't uniquely identify people, whatever. And by the way, the proper way to break up a address is through city, state, and we need to have this street number because there's this exception in education. Some people have different street numbers. In comes the marketing team and says, woo, we're talking to customers? We got to get demographic information. Are they male? Are they female? When were they born? And by the way, I know they want to opt into our great marketing newsletter. Legal team comes in and says, whoa, whoa, whoa. If we're going to collect all this information about people, we have to have a privacy policy in terms of use. Otherwise, we're going to get sued. Now, no one is wrong, right? No one is like the right person here. But in aggregate, all this stuff really adds up. And now somebody comes to this form and they say, forget it. I was going to tell these guys they're doing a great job, but now there's no way I'm going to fill in this form. When that eBay registration redesign I showed you guys earlier, there was a phrase that followed along the presentation, which was, no one raindrop believes they're to blame for the flood. So yes, your particular constraints in your particular department are entirely valid, but when they all add up to what customers end up seeing, then it's not necessarily a good thing. And Lou Carbone, who was speaking here like 2 days ago, uses this phrase of outside in. So instead of thinking inside out from how your organization is structured and what you do, think outside in from the people approaching it. So that's one topic around one voice. The next one is keeping things conversational. So people are human beings, right? We used to, on the old Yahoo registration form, we had a thing that said, preferred content Yahoo US. What the heck does that mean? Well, I prefer content from Yahoo in English. Okay, now I can actually answer that question. Birth date, DDYYY. Hey man, what DD were you born? Day, year, right? And when you apply that to an entire form, all of a sudden you get more conversational. Tell us about yourself, in case you forget your ID and password, just some more crap you have to deal with. Sorry about that. So on and so forth. So there's ways to organize, in addition to what I was talking about before, about thinking about what to remove from a form, what to cut, what to postpone. The other side of the coin is thinking about how to structure things as a conversation, as a flow of information that makes sense to people. So the best practice on organizing these forms is take the time to check every question, make sure you're using one voice. If a form, and this is how I answer that, should my form be 1, 3, or 5 pages long? If it naturally breaks down into a few short topics of conversation that make sense to people, then use a single web page. If it breaks down into a number of large questions that are related only by a few topics, multiple web pages. If it's a lot of questions, but it's one topic, maybe one long web form is best. So our 9th best practice here, form organization. I've been ragging on this form for not having a path to completion, not having clear label alignment, asking us for stuff without telling us why, this whole process of asking for user accounts, this distinction between primary and secondary actions, not having clear errors, so on and so forth. So what would I do to actually change it? Well, this is just a proposal, but there's one real clear call to action that says get online. I don't want to submit anything. I want to get online. So let's make that primary action tied to what people actually want. Associate that with the thing at the top. Get online now. That's what you want. That's what the form should be all about. Unlimited access for 24 hours at $6.95. Great. I can see how much it costs. 2 simple sections. How are you going to pay for this? And do you want a receipt or not? So how am I going to pay for this? First name, last name, credit card. We'll use that inline validation to highlight a credit card field. Expiration date, zip code, email address optional if you want us to send you a receipt. No additional check boxes for terms of service or anything like that. Just click the button and you're off. Right? Compared to this, where we've got these submit, reset, all these different fields and everything, I think this would streamline people making it through quite quickly. And here's the example of inline validation on the form fields and actually on the credit card selection as well. So those are how these 9 best practices can be applied to. You can note path to completion, label alignment, to help and tips. The help and tips are also present here, as it appears on your credit card, if you would like us to send you a receipt, so on and so forth. But it's still a web form, right? So it still doesn't solve the pain of forms suck. Now, one of the things we can do, which is try and change the form factor. Maybe we can make it feel a bit more engaging. This is a form from Huffduffer by Jeremy Keith, where he's essentially turned it into a sentence. I want my username to be Luke. I can click on these little input fields, or I can click on the labels. That puts my cursor in there. All this stuff is accessible semantically, semantic markup, so on and so forth. I can tab through the input fields, so all that stuff works. And it's still a form, but it's approachable in that, hey, I want my username to be this, I want my password to be this, and by the way, so on and so forth, right? So this is one way of maybe making forms a little bit more approachable or engaging. But it's still a form. And I have this philosophy that every web experience starts out with a sign-up form, and that really, really sucks. People should be engaged by what these services do. They should be, as your first interaction with a web service, should be about explaining what it does. It should allow you to use it. And as a result, you become signed up, so to speak, right? Well, let me show you a real example of what I'm talking about. So this is a site called Online Family Tree Maker. And, there's a whole bunch of input fields. There's a lot of things we could talk about what's wrong with this form in terms of these things don't even look like input fields. But anyway, they ask you a bunch of questions. MyHeritage tries to do better. They have a clear primary call to action. They've cut down the number of questions. They have a more linear flow through stuff. They have some help text to get you through it. Right? So they've improved a little bit on this, getting you here, because they've cut it down. They made the form simpler. But let's look at another, and both of these things are things that allow you to create a family tree. But let's look at another example. This is Genie, where the first front page, the first experience is start making a family tree. The first experience isn't sign up or fill in, or tell us your email, tell us, agree to our terms of service or anything like that. It's start making a family tree. You enter your name, you click Start My Tree, then you're adding your mom, you're adding your dad, you're adding, any siblings you have, so on and so forth. And within literally like 3 or 4 clicks or steps, you are doing what the site is for. The site is for creating family trees. Its mission is to kind of create the family tree of the world, right? And you have immediate feedback on how it works, what value it gives to you, and you didn't complete any form. You just got in and started going. In the background, they send you an email that says, hey, here's your username and your password in case you ever want to get back to it. There's a primary action on the front page that says, already got a tree? Click here so you can get back to your tree if you lost this email in your spam inbox. Every once in a while, they send you an update that says, hey, we've added photos. Hey, we've added family messaging or whatever. And these guys got 5 million profiles in 5 months by doing this, by applying this gradual engagement process. Another example, let's say I have a great video I want to put online, right? I want to put on this video, I want to share it with the world. I can go to Google Video and I can tell them my current email address, password, enter password, remember me on this computer, create a Google account, enable personalized search, first name, last name, location, word verification, terms of service, accept privacy policy, I agree. The only thing related to video here is that it says the word video. Or I can go to Jump Cut where it says, hey, make a movie. Click make a movie, give us a title. Grab some media from your computer. Okay, here you got some media on your computer. Now pick a style, edit it, publish it. Start using the service, right? Now if I choose to publish it or share it, it's going to say give me an email address so that we can send this to your friends, or give me an email address so you can come back to it. But again, the initial process of using the service was you got in and you started doing what it was intended to do, versus filling in an input form. Now, I'll show you one more example just because I think it's interesting. So on TripIt, TripIt is a service that you send your travel confirmation emails to. So you get a travel confirmation email from American Airlines or Expedia or Orbit that says your flight or whatever. You send it your confirmation emails and it builds out itineraries for you and travel plans and all this stuff and shares it with people. So when you click Get Started, you don't have an input, you don't have a form to fill out. It just says, hey, just send us an email. Send us a travel confirmation email. You send them a travel confirmation email. They respond back to you and say, okay, we created an account for you. Voila. Right? They know your name because you just sent them an email. They know your email address. You just sent them an email. They know where you're going, where you're traveling to. They parse all this stuff, and voila, they create this itinerary for you just through you sending them an email. No sign-up form required. So I'm going to end on that topic because I think it's an important one, which is try to avoid sign-up forms, right? If you can reflect your site's core essence through a few lightweight interactions and make people successful instantly, you're going to go a lot further than if your first inkling is just to force them to go through a sign-up form. If you auto-generate accounts, make sure there's a clear way to get back to them. And the one point I didn't make with an example, but I can make now, is gradual engagement, this principle I'm talking about, doesn't mean distributing all the input fields in your form to separate pages. It really means thinking through how you can reflect the essence of your site and make people successful. So these were the 10 best practices I walked you guys through and trying to account for our little Boingo web form. If you're interested in learning more about these or you want to see some other ones, there's a book called Web Form Design that I wrote, and it's actually over there in the bookstore. I believe they have a bunch of copies. If you're not interested in going over there, you can use this discount code online, and that'll save you some. Right? If you have any questions or if you want to follow design writings or things that I do, this is my URL, and that's my email address. And I have 2 minutes left here, or 1 minute left here, so what I'll probably do is just take questions over here on the side of the stage if anybody has them. Thank you. Oh, actually, one evaluation forms on your chairs. Sorry. Thank you.